This is Paul McNelis of Kittanning, Pennsylvania, and my name is Connie Rufner. I'm going to be the interviewer, and Paul is the narrator. Okay, so
Okay, Connie.
Paul, thank you. Let me begin by saying thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for remembering.
Well, it's been a privilege to talk to people about this. It really has. How old are you?
89.
89. Okay. So, and you said you remember the Great Depression?
Oh, yeah, I was raised through the Depression. I have some notes here, but, 1918 was the end of World War I.
Yeah.
So I was born 5 years later than that. I didn't realize it was that close. But I was born in 1923, and 1923 to 29 were good times, really, in the country.
Mm-hmm.
We were coming out of World War I, evidently, and people were working, the mines were working, and it was the good times, the roaring 20s. Not that I remember that much, of course I was little, but it was moonshine and automobiles were coming on. So that went on up into 1929 when the stock market crashed.
Uh-huh.
And then things were not so great.
Do you remember that at all?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Sure. See, I would have been 6 at the
Uh-huh.
time. And then we were into the Depression, and it wasn't all that terrible. I don't ever remember not having enough to eat, go to bed. So we lived through it, and it wasn't that bad.
So
But-
what did your dad do?
My dad had a feed mill
Mm-hmm.
and sold explosives
Did he?
with it. And interesting thing about that, laws of course weren't what they are today, but I remember explosives in a little shed behind his place of business, which you would never be allowed today. You just don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting. Another interesting thing, I think, was the fact that my father and some other merchants tried to put together a group who got food together and whatever else they could to help those who didn't have. And that worked fine, except when people from the outlying areas learned about it, well, of course they wanted some of it, and they just couldn't handle it. So it fell apart, but they tried.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the Depression years were not all that terrible. Boys played things like tag. You made your own games up. Played knock-a-the-can. Do you know what that is?
We played kick the can.
Kick the can was another one. Played caddy. Do you know how about caddy?
Uh-uh.
Well, you took a stick maybe 5 inches long, pointed the ends, and took another stick and hit on the end. When it flew up in the air, you hit it. And however far it was, you challenge whoever you're playing against, how many jumps could they take to get back to the mark. So, and of course, mush ball in those days.
Now, what was mush ball?
Well, that was baseball, only bigger
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit softer. You didn't need gloves to play it. What's my note here? Well, I'll jump down. But I remember the government did supply some help for those who had nothing, like 5-pound blocks of cheese.
Uh-huh.
It's terrible tasting.
Uh-huh.
And of course there were soup lines,
Uh-huh.
and there were, well, you probably have heard of the Dust Bowl
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah.
And the government set up CCC camps for
Uh-huh.
young men who built a lot of the state parks and roads and did a lot of good
Mm-hmm.
that you still see today, some of those parks.
Mm-hmm.
For the girls, there was what they called 4-H clubs.
Mm-hmm.
They learned to cook and sew, and well, that's what they had. But I remember the days when boys, particularly, would go up and down the railroad tracks and pick up coal that had fallen off the freight cars so that they could heat their houses.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they finished with that, why, they took the cow, everybody had a cow, to the green, Central Green, and watched it eat, I guess.
Where was the green at?
Well, I was raised up in Cambric County, so I'm just jumping. But that was interesting. Some of the things that the boys did.
Did they find a lot of coal along the side of the
Well,
railroad?
you know, the freight cars would, going around curves and so forth, some of the coal would fall off the top, and that's what they'd find. Yeah.
So at the curves was the best place to look?
Yes. Or a bad spot in the tracks.
Uh-huh.
But, and then going on through the, in time, we're up now to about 41, 45, which is World War II, of course. And I volunteered to go into service at that time. This was, well, I was just 17, and this would have been 1943. And I served, well, I first went in for training down to Mississippi to Camp McCain. Cold night down in Mississippi, tar paper barracks. I was in about 2 weeks and developed meningitis. There was an epidemic down there. So it was right before Easter, actually. And I came out and then recuperated and went back to training. But that was the 347th Infantry. And they were established to eventually do the cross the channel in England. It didn't work out that way, but that's where they were set to go. But anyhow, I went finally as a recruit to the 338th Infantry and went into Italy. And I served for about 3 years there. I was, Italy had the Apennine Mountains down their spine, and that was very mountainous, cold up in the mountains. I was eventually wounded north of Florence and spent just about, well, that was October 25th, up until after Christmas, so it was several months. One thing I wanted to go through is what I think is interesting is the way that people who were wounded were evacuated from the lines. You know, in my case, we were out on a patrol at night, and I was wounded by a grenade, German grenade. And somehow 2 guys, I still don't know who they were, came by and I put an arm around each of their shoulders, and they were able to get me back to where our headquarters were. Unfortunately, it was night. The Germans couldn't see. They were all sleeping, I think. But that was walking, and then they called the stretcher bearers, who carried me maybe most of a mile back to a bombed out barn, a barn where we spent the night. The next morning they put the stretchers across jeeps and went out across this ridge line
Mm-hmm.
as far as they could. Then they threw us over mules, down off the mountain, and down into the valley, river valley, where there were ambulances. Then they took us by ambulances over to Leghorn, Italy, which was on the coast. They did some patchwork there on wounds and eventually put us on a boat. So now we're on a boat going to Naples, where we spent, several months in hospitals. So that was interesting, I think, to me, as compared to now when helicopters are brought in and get the guys out and take care of right away. So that's about all I have on the war, unless you have anything to...
That must have been a really hard way to travel when you were wounded. That must have been,
I'll say.
especially the mules.
Thank God for the mules. That's how we got our rations at night and our ammunition. And whether snow or rain or shine, why, the mules were there. It was interesting, I think, that the Italy by this time was out of the war, but they used Italian soldiers for mule skinners, so they drove the mules.
Oh. Well, the Apennines, are they like the mountains around here, or are they steeper?
No, they're much steeper.
Are they?
Yeah.
And higher, too.
Yeah. You know, it's a series of peaks, one after the other. That's what holds the Italian peninsula from going into the Mediterranean.
So you were wounded and you have a Purple Heart. And where, in Italy, were you in battles in Italy?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, from the time I went there, just about 2.5 years of frontline stuff.
The whole time?
Well, we'd never spend more than about 3 weeks on line. They'd pull you back. You'd come in the back side of a mountain, and then you'd get hot food. Of course, normally you got 2 kinds of rations, either C rations or K rations, because they were more, well, you could carry them inside your shirt. And they weren't all terrible by any means. I'm glad to get them. Occasionally you'd come offline and they would feed you hot food. And you could sleep in pup tent. So normally you were sitting in a foxhole in the ground somewhere. My voice okay?
Yeah, you're fine. You sound good. So, what unit were you in?
338th Infantry, 85th Division, Army.
Were you married or single at the time?
Oh, I was only 17.
Oh, so.
I was not married.
Did you have a girlfriend?
Yeah, but not too many letters.
Oh, really?
Of course, we spent a long time moving, so you didn't get much mail. But boy, when you got a package with cookies, I remember Mrs. Grass soup. You know that? Oh, that was wonderful. But going back to K rations, the box was large Cracker Jack box, but it was impregnated with wax. So you could set that on fire and heat your coffee in the cup, and that made you some warm coffee.
Pretty clever.
Yeah. I'm sure it was designed that way.
Did you ever think we might lose?
No.
Never did.
Never did. Of course, there were times when I say no, but it was pretty close. Yeah, we were often driven off a hill. You know, I kid one of my Polish friends. Monte Cassino was a horrible battle. It took months to take down and get the Germans out of there. But we, the Americans, attacked and got knocked off. The British attacked, got knocked off. And eventually the Polish were the ones who reached the casino up there, the monastery. And we kidded them because, yeah, you took it, but you forgot how to get down. So that was a horrible battle. And I think the people around Monte Cassino, even today, don't really care for the Americans because of what happened. But I think we rebuilt that. It was a beautiful church, monastery, and I think America rebuilt that for them. After the war was finished, we were sent up north of Venice to guard the border to Yugoslavia, because there was a concern that, Yugoslavia was, what was Russia at that time? Red, let's say. And the thought was that they would try to come into northern Italy and take it, which they were trying to. So our job was to keep them out of there, and we had a few little battles.
So do you remember where you were when the war ended?
I was in Verona, Italy. We had been attacking up the Brenner Pass, but they always pulled one unit from the organization back to guard headquarters, which was in Venice, in Verona. So at that point, were guarding headquarters just back from the Brenner Pass. Italy's a beautiful country, back up in the Alps, actually, and the lake country up there. My wife and I have been back to Italy 4 or 5 times, and always enjoyed it. But I think those days are over.
So even though you were there in the war, you
Went back.
liked Italy and you went back.
Well, the first time I went back was with, I worked for DuPont in the explosives business. I just couldn't get away from those explosives.
Apparently not.
But I was there on business the first time back. But my wife and I had gone back several times since. Oh, I love that country. After the war, of course.
Yeah. What was your highest rank in the service?
Sergeant.
You were a sergeant. So were you a squad leader or?
Squad leader, yeah. Infantry squad leader.
How many guys did you have?
How many guys?
Yeah.
Well, each squad was only 15 guys. Remember, I'm now about 19, I guess. So it was interesting because they had what they had, a table of organization, number of non-coms that you were allowed was set, Well, as the war progressed, they shut down people like anti-aircraft because we took over control of the air, and those people were sent in as recruits to us, and they came in with whatever rank. So they didn't want to break them. So actually, I think I was just a PFC at the time. Eventually, they gave me a sergeantcy.
But it took a while until they had an opening. So you were running the squad, but you were still a PFC.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's the way it went.
Do you still keep in touch with any of the guys?
We've had reunions up until last year, every year. Yes, I do keep in touch with some of them.
Where do you have your reunions at?
All over the country. The last one was Indianapolis. And prior to that had been Colorado, Denver. But they were all over. We're just trying to pick spots where they get the most people out. But you just can't get World War II veterans together anymore. There aren't that many.
Yeah. And traveling's gotten harder. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
And traveling's gotten harder for them.
That's right.
I see you went to the, did you go to the memorial?
I did several times, but I went with the fireman's band. I played in the fireman's band for a few years, and they gave us these, it was a wonderful trip. You've probably heard about that.
I did. I've read about it in the paper.
Yeah.
What did you think of the memorial?
Well, it's great. We actually had lived at Frederick at one time, Maryland, which isn't that far. So I'd been there different times. But they did a nice job on that.
I haven't seen it yet.
But one thing that struck me away from the memorial was, what's his name? Bob Dole. Was the 3 times or so that I was there, he stands out at the steps as you go down into it. And Bob was in the 10th Mountain Division, which was in Italy. And he was badly wounded by shrapnel in the shoulder and ran for president, I think, at one point. So that was interesting that he still does that, as far as I know.
Good for him.
Yeah,
Good for him.
he's still trying. Let me see, anything here that might be interesting. Trip to, from Newport News, I think it was. Yeah. To Africa. The war had just been completed in Africa when we were sent across there. But we weren't too long in Africa. The war by now had progressed and gone up through Sicily and into Italy. So that's when we went. Went on British ship. Lousy, not clean. Oh, that was a rough trip.
Was
I think it took us 3 days to go across the Mediterranean. But that's how we got to Italy.
So were you in basic training before you left?
Well, I was in with the 347th Division. It was more than basic, it was advanced. I think I spent almost a year in it before we went across.
And so you traveled from Newport News to Africa. What kind of ship was that?
Well, they called them Liberty ships. You had to get up and miss breakfast if you wanted to find a place to sit on the deck. There were just narrow passageways around. So that was worthwhile. You were glad to do that, just to get out in the sun.
Was it during the summer or the winter? When did you go?
It was early spring, actually. So uneventful, except once they fired whatever they use for protection. And we thought we were going to sink because we're way down in the bottom of that thing trying to get out. So everybody was getting up to the deck.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to do it. I hope kids realize it wasn't everything wasn't all free.
It's been really a privilege for me to talk to people because you don't realize, you can read about it in the history books, but when you
Sure.
talk to somebody and they say, well, I was at the Battle of the Bulge,
Mhm.
and, I'd read the thing about how they didn't have the right clothing, and he
Didn't.
says, we had a shirt and a sweater and an unlined field jacket
Yeah.
in the winter. That really brings home to you what kind of sacrifice people made.
I'm sure. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope it's worthwhile.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.